This is the history that refuses to stay buried. Dawn breaks over a silent battlefield. Smoke clings to damp earth, shrouding broken cannons and torn flags. The air is thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. A lone horse, riderless and trembling, wanders through the morning mist, stepping over bodies that carpet the ground. In the distance, a child's cry echoes and then fades. The sun rises slowly, revealing the horror left behind after a night of ferocious violence. And yet, this is only a glimpse of what is to come. If you want to help me translate more stories like this, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. This is the War of the Triple Alliance, the deadliest conflict in Latin American history. And it begins not with a grand declaration on a famous battlefield, but with a chain of small sparks in a tinderbox of rivalries. In the lush heart of South America, Paraguay stands proud and defiant. A small nation surrounded by larger powers, its president, Marshal Francisco Solano Lopez, gazes out from his palace in Asunción with ambition and anxiety. Beyond his borders, giants stir. The empire of Brazil to the north, Argentina to the south, each hungry for influence, each wary of the other. And to the southeast lies Uruguay, a tiny nation whose internal struggles are about to ignite a continental explosion. In 1864, civil war in Uruguay sets the stage for conflict. Brazil and Argentina support one faction and threaten Paraguay's ally in Montevideo. Lopez, alarmed, warns that if Brazil intervenes in Uruguay, Paraguay will act. But in October 1864, Brazilian forces invade Uruguay regardless. The line is crossed. Lopez's blood boils. The moment he has dreaded and perhaps secretly craved has arrived. On a steamy November day, Lopez makes the first move. A Brazilian steamboat, the Marquês de Olinda, chugs upriver toward Brazil's Mato Grosso province, its crew unaware that war has overtaken them. Suddenly, a Paraguayan gunboat, the Taquari, emerges from a river bend with cannons at the ready. A thunderous shot cracks the air, a warning across the bow. Panicked sailors scramble on deck as Paraguayan Marines swarm aboard. Within hours, the Marquês de Olinda is seized, and its passengers, including a Brazilian governor, are prisoners. News of this bold strike electrifies Paraguay. In Asunción, church bells ring out and crowds cheer. Lopez has kept his word. The war has begun. Paraguay strikes on two fronts. One column invades Brazil's Mato Grosso, cutting through jungle and seizing remote forts. For a brief moment, victory comes easy, as another drives south into Argentina's Corrientes province and even into Uruguay at shocking speed. Village after village falls. In one town, an Argentine mother watches Paraguayan troops march down her street, unsure whether to flee or to cheer. To some, these invaders are liberators from distant masters. To others, they are conquerors. In weeks, the map of South America trembles. But this whirlwind of Paraguayan victory cannot last. The great powers are awakening and uniting against Lopez. In Buenos Aires, President Bartolomé Mitre receives the unbelievable reports. Paraguayan troops have invaded Argentine soil. In Rio de Janeiro, Emperor Dom Pedro II of Brazil, usually calm and scholarly, seethes at Lopez's audacity. This cannot stand. In secret, Brazil, Argentina, and the new allied government of Uruguay sign a pact of blood and iron, the Treaty of the Triple Alliance. Behind closed doors, these leaders agree on terms that amount to Paraguay's annihilation. The war will not end until Solano Lopez is removed from power. Three nations marshal their might against one. The odds are impossible. The die is cast. Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay muster a massive Allied army. From Buenos Aires to Rio de Janeiro, trains and steamships carry tens of thousands of soldiers north. Hardened Argentine gauchos ride alongside Brazilian regiments. Families wave tearful goodbyes, fearing they will never see their men again. All eyes turn northward, toward the vast Paraguay River that guards Lopez's domain. It is on that river that destiny tilts. June 11th, 1865. The naval battle of Riachuelo. Under a blazing sky, ironclad warships duel on the Paraná River in a deafening roar of cannon and smoke. Paraguay's navy, smaller but fierce, swarms forward to smash the Brazilian fleet. A young Paraguayan gunner on the riverbank covers his ears as his cannon blasts away, the recoil bruising his shoulder. On the Brazilian flagship, Admiral Francisco Barroso stands amid flying splinters, shouting orders to ram the enemy. A Brazilian gunboat rams a Paraguayan steamer with a sickening crunch. Black smoke rolls over the waters. By afternoon, the river runs red with blood and oil. In the end, the Paraguayan flotilla is shattered. The Brazilian Navy's victory at Riachuelo cuts off Paraguay from the outside world. Watching the wreckage drift downstream, a Paraguayan soldier sinks to his knees in despair. The tide of war is turning. The Triple Alliance now controls the rivers, the lifelines of the region, and with them the path into Paraguay's heart. Lopez's early bravado gives way to grim resolve. Paraguay is isolated, but its people stand defiant. Every man who can hold a weapon is called to arms. The capital, Asunción, buzzes with frenetic energy as the reality of a long war sets in. Women who once tended only their homes now sew uniforms, bake bread for troops, and even melt down church bells to cast cannons. Mothers and daughters gather in chapels by candlelight, praying for their husbands and sons on the front, and for strength to endure what is coming. Lopez, jaw set hard, fortifies his nation. Along the Paraguay River, his engineers build fortress after fortress, determined to make the invaders pay dearly for every inch of soil. Cannons are dug into muddy redoubts. Sharpened stakes line the riverbanks. Sprawling marshes are turned into defensive mazes. The scent of orange blossoms from distant groves mingles with the stench of churned mud and sweat as soldiers toil. The stage is set for a bitter and protracted struggle. When Allied forces finally cross into Paraguay in April 1866, they expect a swift campaign. Instead, they march into a green hell. The land itself seems hostile. Swamps, thorny thickets, mosquito-infested marshes await the uninvited armies. The Allies advance with drums beating and flags flying. Thousands of Brazilian, Argentine, and Uruguayan troops snaking into enemy territory. They soon encounter boggy ground under a merciless sun. Every step forward is fraught with unseen peril. One humid afternoon at Estero Belaco, Allied columns pushing through tall grass suddenly face a withering fusillade from hidden Paraguayan trenches. The ground erupts with musket fire and artillery blasts. Mud and shrapnel spray the air. Men and horses scream in pain. The Allies stagger and realize this war will be no easy march. On May 24th, 1866, on a plain called Tuyuti, Lopez attempts to turn the tide with one bold stroke. Believing he can drive the invaders back, he hurls 25,000 Paraguayan soldiers in a massive surprise attack on the Allied camp. The Allies, slightly outnumbered, are caught off guard as wave after wave of Paraguayan infantry and cavalry burst from the tree line, shouting their savage Guarani war cries. The Battle of Tuyuti becomes the bloodiest ever fought in South America. Amid the deafening boom of cannons and the crack of rifles, men fight hand to hand in primal desperation. A Brazilian volunteer, barely 18, finds himself face to face with a Paraguayan bayonet. Time slows as he parries and thrusts, adrenaline drowning his fear. All around, chaos reigns. Gun smoke and dust, the screams of wounded men, the guttural cries of combat. Cannons overturned by artillery blasts smolder on the trampled grass. By sundown, the guns finally fall silent. Bodies carpet the field alongside splintered wagons and blood-soaked flags. Over 12,000 Paraguayans lie dead or wounded, and some 6,000 Allied soldiers as well. The carnage staggers even the hardest veterans. An Argentine officer, gazing over the corpse-strewn expanse in the twilight, whispers that hell itself must look like this. Paraguay's daring assault has failed. 2UT is a Pyrrhic victory for the Allies. They hold the field, but at a ghastly cost. And so the war grinds on, growing ever more ferocious.
Through late 1866, battle follows battle. In September 1866, at Curupayty, the Allies make a disastrous frontal assault against solid Paraguayan defenses. In less than an hour, Paraguayan cannon fire cuts down over 5,000 Allied troops, while barely denting Lopez's lines. The Allied onslaught collapses, halted for the first time, as cheers erupt from the Paraguayan trenches. Curupayty is a stunning victory for Lopez's forces, and it brings the Allied advance to a standstill. But triumph soon turns to stalemate, and stalemate breeds desperation. Weeks stretch into months as both sides dig in. The Allied armies camp uneasily in the pestilential Paraguayan swamps, their offensive bogged down. Disease begins to stalk the camps. Cholera, malaria, dysentery, killing almost as many men as the battles. At night, Brazilian and Argentine soldiers huddle around smoky campfires, swatting mosquitoes and lamenting fallen comrades. Back home, families grow weary of casualty lists and long for an end to this distant slaughter. In Paraguay, hunger gnaws at the population. With fields untilled and rivers blockaded, food grows scarce. Rations for Lopez's troops dwindle to a handful of maize or a strip of dried beef. Yet the Paraguayan will hold firm. Around their own campfires, they strum guitars and sing haunting folk songs that praise Lopez and vow defiance, even as their stomachs ache and their uniforms turn to rags. By 1867, the Allies regroup under new leadership, determined to break the deadlock. Brazil sends its greatest commander, the Marquês de Caxias, to take charge. A seasoned, steely general, Caxias whips the Allied forces into shape. He trains his cannons on Lopez's strongholds and even employs a marvel of technology, a hot air observation balloon that rises above the jungle, spying on Paraguayan lines from the sky. Under Caxias's direction, Allied engineers hack new roads through the wilderness, flanking the Paraguayan defenses rather than charging headlong. Step by step, they encircle the formidable Paraguayan fortress of Humaitá, which has long barred the way to Asunción. For months, Humaitá's massive guns command the river, booming defiantly at any Allied ship that dares approach. But Caxias is patient and methodical. In a daring operation in early 1868, Brazilian ironclad gunboats, armored like black turtles, run past Humaitá's guns under cover of darkness. Shells splash around them, but the ironclads slip through and steam upriver. Humaitá is now cut off from resupply. Starvation and bombardment do their work. One night, the remaining Paraguayan defenders silently abandon the fort and melt into the jungle. At dawn, Allied troops cautiously enter the battered bastion. Inside, they find emaciated soldiers too weak to fight, and a tattered Paraguayan flag still flying defiantly. The road to Asunción is finally open. The war, however, is far from over. Solano Lopez refuses to surrender. As Allied forces push deeper into Paraguay, the conflict enters a new, even more brutal phase. In the winter of 1868, Caxias launches a bold campaign known as the Desembrada, the December Offensive, striking Lopez's remaining army from an unexpected direction. Battles erupt at Itororo and Ave, each clash fiercer than the last. Finally, at Lomas Valentinas, near the end of 1868, Lopez's forces make their last stand before the capital. Under a punishing sun, amid scrubby hills, the Allies overwhelm the exhausted Paraguayan defenders. In the chaos, one Paraguayan battalion fights almost to the last man, selling their lives dearly to buy time for Lopez to slip away yet again. When the gunfire finally ceases, Allied officers survey a ghastly scene. Entire Paraguayan units lying as they fell, virtually wiped out in place. And yet, once more, Lopez has vanished into the hills. The path to the capital lies open, but the war's final act is still to come. In January 1869, Allied forces occupy Asunción without resistance. The Paraguayan capital is a ghost town. Nearly all its people have fled inland. Victorious troops raise their flags over silent streets. Discipline falters for a moment as looters move through empty houses until Brazilian commanders restore order. Paraguay as a state has effectively fallen. Yet still, Francisco Solano Lopez refuses to surrender. Lopez has retreated into the mountains and forests of the north, dragging with him the remnants of his army and thousands of civilians, loyal families, porters, camp followers. His once dashing uniform is tattered, his face gaunt with fatigue, but his will is unbroken. In muddy jungle camps, he rallies anyone who remains. These refugees suffer horribly. Disease and hunger stalk them, and each day more collapse by the roadside. Lopez's paranoia deepens as doom approaches. Convinced that traitors lurk in his shrinking ranks, he orders swift and brutal purges. Even some of his closest allies and family members fall to his pistol or the hangman. In one grim episode, he has his own brothers and brothers-in-law executed for alleged treason. Gunshots echo through the night not from battle, but from firing squads carrying out the marshal's deadly suspicions. Fear and fierce loyalty alone keep those last followers by Lopez's side. Among them is an Irish woman, Eliza Lynch, Lopez's lover and the mother of his children. Through every defeat and every flight into the jungle, Eliza stays with him, a pale, determined figure in a ragged gown, nursing the sick and comforting the frightened as the world collapses around her. The Allies, now led by Brazil's dashing Prince Gaston, the Count d'Eu, Emperor Pedro's own son-in-law, are determined to end this war once and for all. They pursue Lopez relentlessly into the country's wild interior. Lopez and a few hundred survivors flee north into endless hills and jungles, with Allied troops doggedly pursuing through rain and mud. The land itself fights the pursuers with disease and exhaustion. Months drag by. At last, in early 1870, Lopez makes camp at Cerro Corá, a remote emerald valley by Paraguay's frontier. Here, the tragedy reaches its final act. March 1st, 1870. Sunrise at Cerro Corá. The Paraguayan encampment lies quiet, shrouded in morning mist. Only the coughs of the sick and the soft weeping of children break the silence. Lopez, ill and exhausted, stands by a creek, polishing his sword. He will not consider surrender. Around him, the last tatter of the Paraguayan army takes position with fatalistic resolve. A few hundred gaunt men and boys, some barely in their teens, clutching rusted muskets and makeshift spears.
Eliza Lynch is here too, holding her youngest son in her arms and whispering comfort to her older boys. Suddenly, a shout echoes from the surrounding forest. Gunshots crackle through the trees. Brazilian troops have arrived, 8,000 strong, closing in like a tightening noose. Cavalrymen crash out of the jungle at full gallop. Chaos erupts as the last Paraguayans fire back with whatever they have. Bullets whistle through the camp. A Brazilian officer calls out, "Surrender! You are surrounded!" In the pandemonium, Eliza Lynch gathers her children into a carriage. Lopez shouts at her above the din, "Go! Save the boys! Go!" She hesitates, tears in her eyes, until he repeats the command. At last she climbs in, and the carriage jolts into motion, racing away through the brush, escorted by a handful of Paraguayan horsemen. 15-year-old Juan Francisco, Lopez's eldest son, a colonel in the shattered army, rides at the head of the escort, determined to protect his mother and siblings. They have not gone far when a squadron of Brazilian cavalry emerges from the trees, thundering toward the fleeing carriage. "Halt!" a Brazilian captain cries, raising his saber. The driver pulls up in terror as the horsemen surround them. A soldier yanks open the carriage door. Young Juan Francisco Lopez refuses to submit. Drawing his revolver, he fires at the enemy. "Never!" he shouts. And an instant later, a Brazilian lance pierces his chest. The boy falls lifeless to the mud as his mother screams in anguish.
Not far behind, Lopez finds himself facing the end. He refuses to flee any further. Mounted on a weary white horse, he gathers a handful of his bravest men and charges straight into the Brazilian lines, one final eruption of Paraguayan fury. The last battle of the war explodes in 15 minutes of desperate melee. Sabers flash and clank, muzzle flashes stutter through the trees. One by one, Lopez's loyal companions are cut down around him until the marshal stands nearly alone, saber in hand, defying an army. A Brazilian lancer spots the gaunt man on the white horse and surges forward, leveling his weapon. The long steel blade slashes Lopez across the stomach, tearing a mortal wound, but somehow he keeps the saddle. Gasping for breath, blood staining his uniform, Lopez spurs his horse toward the Aquitaban Creek at the edge of the camp, trying to escape into the forest beyond. With a few remaining followers, he splashes into the shallow water. But on the far bank, he has no strength left. Bleeding and weak, Lopez reaches a shallow river, but cannot climb the high far bank. Within moments, Brazilian soldiers surround him as he stands, sword in hand, against a small palm tree. A Brazilian captain steps forward with pistol drawn. "Yield. Surrender, Lopez," he demands. The Marshal of Paraguay, drenched in blood, back to a tree, summons every last ounce of pride. He will not bow. He raises himself up, and in a final act of defiance, hurls his sword toward his enemies. "Muero con mi patria," he cries. "I die with my country." A gunshot rings out. Francisco Solano Lopez, President and Generalissimo of Paraguay, falls dead in the mud. And just like that, the war is over. 5 years of unimaginable bloodshed come crashing to an end in a remote jungle glade. A strange hush falls over Cerro Corá. Smoke drifts through the trees. The creek runs red. The Brazilian soldiers lower their weapons, gazing at the fallen dictator's body with a mix of relief, awe, and pity. A few, moved by respect for such indomitable courage, even remove their caps. In the distance, the ragged firing and screams are fading as the last pockets of resistance are extinguished. Eliza Lynch, trembling and grief-stricken, returns under guard to the spot where Lopez and their son lie dead. With bare hands, she digs a shallow grave by the stream. Into it she places the bodies of the man she loved and her brave boy. She covers them with earth, tears and rain mingling on her face. Then this Irish woman, who became a legend of Paraguay, bids a final farewell and walks away into exile. Paraguay is devastated beyond belief. Some say over half its people perished. An entire generation of men is gone, villages left with only widows and children. Fields once green are now fields of graves. Brazil and Argentina seize Paraguayan territory, and their armies occupy the shattered nation for years. Each of the victors has paid a price. Brazil lost tens of thousands of men and spent fortunes. The strain of this war will contribute to the fall of its empire and the end of slavery. Argentina also buried many, but emerges as the dominant power in the Plata region. And tiny Uruguay, the spark that ignited this conflict, remains independent, though scarred by the ordeal. Yet out of the ashes, life must go on. In Paraguay, the women who survive now shoulder the task of rebuilding. They till the fields, teach the children, and care for the wounded. There are almost no able-bodied men left to do so. These women become the backbone of a new Paraguay, raising a generation almost alone. To repopulate the country, a grim resolve takes hold. Women are encouraged to have many children, even if it means bending the old rules of marriage and propriety. The cultural fabric of the nation is forever changed by this need to survive. And to this day, Paraguay remembers the horror and heroism of that war. Each year on August 16th, the nation honors Dia del Niño, the Day of the Child, in memory of the thousands of children who perished at Acosta Ñu. Across the country, people lay flowers and light candles for those brave boys and their mothers who met their end on that tragic plain. The War of the Triple Alliance remains a wound and a warning. It remains a story of both hubris and courage, cruelty and desperation. Even today, its memory looms large in Paraguay, the tale of a nation brought to the brink of annihilation, yet somehow enduring. This is the history that refuses to stay buried, a war no one can forget,